All right, good afternoon and welcome. I am Cassidy Avila with the Center for Optimizing Rural Health. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, Defending Rural Healthcare Against Ransomware. Before I introduce some of our speakers, I just want to give you a couple of announcements. We are recording the webinar, and we will be posting it to our website along with the slides within about 48 hours. And so you will receive an email from CORE with a link once that's been posted. And it will also include a very brief 1-minute survey. I'm also going to drop that in the chat closer to the end of the webinar. So if you'll just take a minute, we would appreciate that. And if you have any questions during the webinar and you would like to go ahead and drop them into the chat, feel free to do so. We encourage you to do so. That way, when we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar, we've got some questions to start with, and I will make sure that those get answered. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can just choose my name from the drop-down box in chat, and I would be happy to ask that question on your behalf. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Jake Milstein. Jake brings 25 years of product sales and marketing experience to Critical Insight's brand and content strategy. He is an experienced marketing leader with a passion for communications, storytelling, and content. He's worked in both cybersecurity and journalism, which presents a unique mix of passionate, approachable, and clear communication around cybersecurity. Jake also speaks frequently at conferences and to hospital boards and elected leaders about cybersecurity and how to prepare, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. He leads the sales and marketing team at Critical Insight to provide top-tier cybersecurity services to the people and organizations who need it most. Before joining Critical Insight, he drove Seattle's news station KIRO7 to become #1 in television rating, leading live stream, video, visit, and page views. He launched the first local custom flash briefing on Alexa voice and video, became the most downloaded local news app on Roku, and created the most engaging Facebook local news page in America. So welcome, Jake. And I think that you are going to introduce some of your colleagues, right?
I am, and I'm the least interesting person here. So
I've never heard that bio. That was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, I had ChatGPT write it. So no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so hi everybody, and one of the things I'd love to do is we always want to know who we're presenting to. And when we were talking to Cassidy about preparing for this, she said, it's going to be a mix of IT directors, of CIOs, CEOs, CFOs. And so one of the things that's really helpful to us is to know who we're presenting to, because if I let Mike do it, he'll go so deep into security speak that other people won't understand it. So it's always helpful
Fred will.
to know. Fred will too. So if you want to put in the chat, let us know where you are, what your job title is, and then we'll know who we're presenting to. So today we're going to talk about defending rural healthcare against ransomware. We'll do introductions. We're going to talk about current cyber threats. We're going to talk about how a hospital stopped a cyber attack, and then we're going to talk about another one that fell victim to a cyber attack and what happened. We're going to talk about how to do cybersecurity on a budget, because if you are like any other rural healthcare organization that we work with, you do not have an unlimited budget for IT and security, even if you have a fantastic Alfa Romeo. And then we're going to talk about something that is relatively new, which is aligning with the NIST cybersecurity framework for rural health, which is something that the Department of Health and Human Services is now pushing healthcare organizations to do. So joining me today, Mike Hamilton is the former CISO of the city of Seattle. He and Fred founded Critical Insight. Fred has a whole storied background that's much more interesting than mine, where he was on the group that wrote the original HIPAA security rule. And he's done healthcare cybersecurity consulting for somewhere between 30 and 80 years. Jonathan Inskeep joined us. He was one of our customers. He is the former CIO at Caribou Medical Center. Jonathan, what, 25 bed critical access hospital? Yeah, critical access hospital in Idaho. And so, as I look at the titles in the chat here, Jonathan has been in your shoes. And so he'll talk about his experience as we go through this whole thing. Now, I want to double down on something Cassidy said, which is my favorite thing to do is to interrupt these guys and ask questions. So if you have questions, ask away. And I'm seeing some familiar folks in the chat. So good to see some of you again. We originally gave a talk like this to the American Hospital Association Rural Conference. We are the preferred provider for this group of services on the right for managed detection response, which is SOC as a service, along with the HIPAA security risk assessment, continuous vulnerability identification. But really the most important part of that is for those of you who've ever run across John Rigi, who's the head of cybersecurity for the American Hospital Association. He had this problem where hospitals were coming to him and saying, hey, there are 2,500 security providers. How do we pick one? And so John went out and found the right one for different categories. So which is the right one for managed detection response, which is the right one for insurance, and on and on and on. He picked us for SOC as a service, also called managed detection response, as one of the providers there. And so anyway, that's how you know that we generally know what we're talking about. All right. Mike and Fred, current cyber threats. You want to talk about, Mike, will you talk about the 3 cyber threats facing rural health?
So first of all, in our business, we have the worst secret handshake language of anyone. So, ransomware, you hear this all the time. It's extortion. That's what it is. And the way it works is it starts like every other thing starts. You get a little piece of unwanted software on a computer. It got in somehow. Somebody tripped over a booby-trapped website. Somebody clicked on something they shouldn't have. Somebody found a USB stick in a parking lot and jammed it into a machine. Okay, you got something you don't want. Malware can do a lot of things. Send spam, monitor your keystrokes, try to get your bank account password, look around for records to steal, whatever. What ransomware does is it provides interactive access to somebody probably on the other side of the world who will come and go with impunity. And they will look around the network and they're going to find your backups and they're going to find your key servers and they're going to find records to potentially take out first, so that they can also hold those records back and say, well, if you're not going to pay us, then we're going to make all your records public, and onto the wall of shame you go. And eventually what they'll do is they'll lay in encryption software. All these things that they found that make you operate, they're going to get down to where it's one button push and then everything is encrypted and your network no longer works. And then the extortion demands start coming out of a printer, or you get a phone call, or you get messaged in some way. That's what ransomware is. And anymore, ransomware, this is interesting, the federal government has changed their rhetoric around this. And if you use ransomware specifically against critical infrastructure, and that obviously healthcare is critical sector, you are no longer a criminal, you are a terrorist.
Which is good. So, I feel like the federal government finally caught up to us just calling them ransomware terrorists.
Yeah, it's, I mean, they've done other things as well, but that rhetorical change made a difference right then and there. Business email compromise. This is what we lose more money for than anything else. So there's a few variants of this. One is I'll just send you an invoice, and if it's under some kind of threshold, your accounts payable isn't even going to worry about it. They're just going to pay me. Okay. All right. Well, kind of in the mid-range, you will get email from the CEO or someone of authority who will say, I need you to make an emergency wire transfer. Or, the lame end is, I'm at a conference and I want you to buy me some gift cards. All right. On the high end of this, it's 2 organizations that have a payment association. One pays for a service and one collects fees. And so the one that collects the fees, their email system gets penetrated. Somebody will surveil the email. They'll figure out who it is that's paying, and they'll eventually impersonate someone, send them a message and say, we just got a new bank account. Here's the new routing number. And from that point forward, those payments are redirected to the bad guy's bank account and not yours. That's business email compromise. And that's the high-end variant that we're losing. I think it was $3-point-something billion last year. Fred's nodding his head, so I think that's accurate. And then finally, There's the third party breach where you really have nothing to do with it, and it's a piece of software, as some kind of tool or service that you use, and that provider of that is compromised, and their product is therefore compromised. And the poster child for this was SolarWinds, the network management software, and the SolarWinds software itself was compromised at SolarWinds, and then when they sent out an update, everybody got the backdoored update. So that's a third party breach. And this is one of the things today that a lot of focus is going into, right? Third party risk management, and how do you do that? And how do you make sure that everyone, that your business associates are providing their papers showing that they have demonstrable security? And more this is a focus of the federal government. And, we won't get into the national cybersecurity strategy, but a key component of that is trying to push security onto the providers of products and services, especially software products and IoT, rather than the end user being responsible for securing all of that. So this thing about third-party security and third-party risk management is kind of a main topic of discussion these days.
And, Fred, when we think about the cybersecurity problem in rural health, as, I'm looking at the titles of folks here, we sort of half IT, half not IT, but, obviously these are the three that you see, right?
Yeah. So everyone faces staffing challenges, even if you're IBM or Netflix or some giant company, and it becomes infinitely more acute as you move down. And especially when you get to rural healthcare, you're having to find highly trained cyber professionals who are incredibly well paid, that have companies like Amazon and Google trying to poach them the second that you brought them up. So how do you do this if you are in a rural setting? You're, maybe the local pool of talent is somewhat limited. Well, you need to start thinking about how you either outsource those components or how you try to hire on a regional or maybe even a national basis and start living in a remote world, because there's probably little chance that you're going to be able to attract enough talent. You may be able to find a few, but hard to attract enough talent locally to really address the modern cyber threats you're facing. The other huge one, of course, is the cost. And of course, staffing has a cost, but there's all these other things like hardware, software, outsourced services. Frankly, if you're in rural healthcare or a critical access hospital, you're going to have to outsource some component of either your security or your network or something along those lines, because again, you have limited people, and frankly, you're trying to run a full hospital here. Other things that come in and hide here are, wait a minute, our board who approves our spending has never heard us ask for this particular product or service before. So if you're going to come to them for the first time and say, we need to monitor 24/7, 365, that's what HIPAA tells us we need to do, and you've never had that conversation with your critical access hospital board before, they're going to find it very hard to swallow at a significant new cost that comes out of the blue. So start helping them to understand that these kinds of costs, if they're not already there, are going to be coming. And then there's, of course, insurance, right? Everybody's insurance costs are going up. It is a rapidly high requirements involved to now get cyber insurance. You may have difficulty even getting it if you don't spend some money up front to secure your infrastructure. And the problem overall is there's no single silver bullet. This is a constellation of things you need to do. It will always and forever be that way. There will be no getting easier and smaller. In fact, things are going to get more complex as more technology rolls out, more AI, more IoT devices, medical devices. Things are getting more difficult, folks, not easier.
Yeah, and for those of you not in IT, I want to, there's an analogy here that I think is helpful, which is, there are all these cybersecurity tools on the market, and really what they do is they send alerts. And unless you have a staff that can see those alerts, and you can think about this in a medical setting with anything in the hospital that sends an alert, right? If you don't have a nurse, you don't have the right person to look at those alerts, then the alerts, just become, what's called alert fatigue, of course, which is you're not, nobody's paying attention to those. I talked to one rural hospital recently that has a system called a SIM that is alerting all the time. And I said, how often do you check those alerts? And they said, the two guys looked at each other and one said, well, I checked it last Friday. And the other one said, I thought we checked it monthly. So, understanding that those alerts are always coming in and somebody's got to be there to see them means that you can't just buy, systems that just send more and more alerts. And, just in the past week, some important headlines. Kansas Hospital is reporting ransomware attack to its patients. The attack happened last year, but they're now reporting it to their patients. Right now, Staten Island Hospital is operating without network amid ransomware. Staten Island is not a rural location. And then this very interesting one from the Journal of American Medical Association, half of ransomware attacks have disrupted healthcare delivery. So not a surprise, of course, that has happened. But, after seeing a study, what they saw was a ton of bad outcomes to patients because of ransomware. I think we all at this point are familiar with, the one where, unfortunately, a baby died. And they attributed the death to ransomware, and there's a lawsuit around the whole thing. And then the last one is really alarming to us because we do a report every year to, is ransomware up, is ransomware down, and it looked to be down. And then in Q1, there's now all these headlines after lull, ransomware is making a comeback, which is unfortunate.
Well, and just add to that. I mean, the detail here, or maybe you're going to get into this in the next slide, is about what happens regionally, right? When there's a disruption like this.
Mm-hmm.
But let me point out as well that there's a longer tail to some of these things than just the time it takes to get back to an operational capacity. Because right now, the Federal Trade Commission is enforcing with vigor the False Claims Act, so that if there were public pronouncements made about, yes, we're compliant with HIPAA or something like that, and then they find out after an event that that was not true, here comes the False Claims Act and the fines. In addition, because of some of the new privacy statutes, notably in California Consumer Privacy Act, there's interesting wording in there that says you do not have to have experienced fraud from the disclosure of your record in order to have standing. So there are class action suits that are following record disclosure events, right? I mean, setting ransomware aside, the loss of the records and the tendency of the bad guys to also grab the records and hold those. Okay, if you're not going to pay us to get your network back, we're making all this public. They make it public, and here comes the False Claims Act, and here comes the class action suit. So, it's worse than just the technical stuff that has to be fixed.
Yeah, and Jonathan, as you saw being in the CIO seat, and something happens nearby regionally, all of a sudden you, the IT director, the CIO, start getting questions.
Yeah, we do. And then the sad reality is you could be doing good on your front on your hospital, but you're all connected, right? Especially at Call Hospital, you're connected to the larger entity. And so, I mean, we had panic when one of our larger hospitals came down with ransomware on their side. We were worried that might have gotten to us because we actively engaged with them.
Yeah, and I mean, and some of it like that is reasonable, and some of it is not. One of our customers is a city that, all of a sudden the mayor and city council got really excited about needing cybersecurity because a hospital nearby got hit by ransomware. Does it, is there any logical reason? No. But, all of a sudden you all get questions when it happens near you. So two hospitals I want to talk about. One, so one of the friends of the of Critical Insight is Tim Powers, who is now the CFO of the Idaho Hospital Association. Previously was the CEO of Humboldt Hospital in Nevada. And the story he tells is that they got hit with ransomware. And when they got hit with ransomware, it was happened in the middle of the night. all of a sudden the screen came up. It made it through the whole hospital, took the entire hospital down, and came through somebody clicking a link, and then nobody seeing it for a number of days. Hospital got taken down, and it took them 6 months to get everything back up and running. 2 weeks, I believe he says, 2 weeks on paper, before they got some systems back up. And one of the things that Tim says is, yeah, the IT director had come to board meetings and had asked for things, and the board just never approved them. And then after the attack, he said he's never seen, I will quote him here, "I have never seen a board approve $1 million as fast as that moment." So that is not a good outcome. And then the story on the right, it's one of our customers. I can't put the name up there, but they had a contractor come in with a laptop to fix a machine. Contractor, had no idea that they had malware on their system, on their laptop, plugged it in, and had a malware toolkit on there that started pinging to Russia. Our security operations center saw it, and Fred, we helped them shut it down before anything bad happened. There was no report, there was no nothing, but it looked like it was pinging out to the Conti ransomware gang, which is one of the Russian ransomware gangs.
Yeah. So what they're trying to do right there is begin to exfiltrate data. So it's looking for a little bit of information. They're probably doing a bunch of reconnaissance. First step, I want to steal the data, right? Once I've stolen the data, then I can launch the ransomware attack. And if you decide I'm not going to pay the ransom, or somehow you're able to stop that, you say, but aha, I've got your data, and I'm going to be publishing that on the dark web. So I can tell you personally, got a letter 2 days ago. My health information breached again. Ironically, they're no longer paying for any sort of monitoring. So we've reached the stage where even any concessions when your healthcare information is lost are gone, and they're just letting you know you got a problem and you got to look out for it. So kind of a disappointing state we're in.
And one of the things that I do want to indicate about that organization is they have a superior security posture compared to other rural hospitals that I talked to, and the bad guys still got it. Right, the bad guys will find, you can do everything you possibly can, but that machine still needs to be serviced, still needs to be updated, and here comes a contractor from another company to plug into your network, and the bad things still happen. So what do you do about that? Mike, can you explain the risk equation?
Yeah, well, so I mean, this is the spoiler right here. I mean, this is what we got to land on, right? You can do everything in the world you can to make a bad thing not happen, and that bad thing is still going to happen. It is a foreseeable event. And so here, if you extricate your mind from the attitude that if we just invest enough and we just put enough controls in place, we will keep the bad guys out of our network. All right. No. Here is what we think about if we move our mindset into we're going to manage this risk. Okay, so there's two parts to the risk equation here. Risk is the product of the likelihood of a bad thing happening and its impact. First of all, what's a bad thing? Well, you can, cyber is scary, Russian cyber buffer overflow, SQL inject. No, that's not the thing. Loss of protected records, theft, extortion, being used to attack your business associates, or just being knocked down for the sake of being knocked down. It's 5 things that actually go wrong that will cost you money. There's not that many buckets that you can put bad cyber outcomes into. Okay, so what's the likelihood of one of those things happening? And the way that you buy down risk by approaching the likelihood term is through the application of preventive controls. We have firewalls, we filter our email, we train our users, we use multi-factor authentication, blah, 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 blah. And when you have exhausted all of the preventive controls that you can possibly deploy, you have not bought down risk to zero, and you never will. Somebody will find a USB stick in a bathroom and jack it into a machine. Somebody's going to do something dumb. There is not now, nor will there ever be, a firewall for gullibility. Okay, so when you've exhausted everything that you can do to deploy those preventive controls, then you move to the impact term. And this is what the federal government talks about when they're talking about resilience. What's resilience? It means you got to take a punch and get up off the mat before the 10 count. All right. How do you do that? How do you limit the impact? Through detection and response, right? You put the grease fire out on the stove before the house is engulfed in flames. And, you know, the only way to do that is to watch the network, watch what's happening with your endpoints, watch what's happening with the cloud. And when you see something aberrational, somebody's got to take a look at it. Jake was talking about a SIM, okay? Security Information and Event Management. That's what it is. It's a thing that gobbles up all kinds of events and tries to make sense out of them. Well, if nobody's watching that thing, that's a tree falling in the forest. That your house is going to be engulfed in flames. All right. If nobody is taking any action at 3 a.m. on a Saturday, the house is going to get engulfed in flames. So this is the way to treat risk. You do everything you can to apply preventive controls, but then you have to move on to that impact term. And that means have an incident response plan, practice it, monitor your network and your endpoints. Okay. This is the proper way to think about this if you want to, you know, live through one of these events.
Yeah. And, you know, so Jonathan, you know, when you were at Caribou, you know, you had to attack that risk equation to make sure, you know, you knew a bad guy could get in. So how'd you do it?
Yeah, it was actually pretty challenging. Because, you know, I had a lot of great utilities that I worked with in the past, but it all came back to the same thing. It's like I had a SIM that would generate alerts. I did not have the staff to watch those alerts. And you know, I started headhunting, looking for a partner that I could work with, somebody that could help me govern my infrastructure. When you're in a critical access hospital, it's not uncommon to wear the hats of many. And so I had a lot of different other job duties, you know, like network infrastructure for our customer base, which is the clinical staff. You've also got EHR administration. I mean, there's just a whole host. So where do you find the time to be able to do everything all at once? You can't. It's impossible. And this is what led me to go find a security partner, somebody that actually knew this space, could help me out, somebody that could help me out with regulatory compliance too as well, right? It wasn't just I'm looking for this one specific thing. I'm looking for a lot of different things from a specialist. I worked with a bunch of different MSPs, and sadly, you get into the weeds with them. They don't know the regulatory part, right? They're really good for setting things up, but they can't help you when it comes to policy, incident response planning, and these other entities that you need as a hospital. So I was cruising through conference to conference looking for the next best solution that would fit my budget and my environment. And that's where I happened upon Critical Insight. And what I was impressed by was here's a company doing everything that I need as an IT component in my environment. And this was even on the regulatory side, which was impressive because I was having to go from one vendor to the next vendor because each one had a specific piece that they do. Nobody did everything. And it was very challenging. And so to help us out was being able to find that partner in that environment space to help with the security watching, because these new security cybersecurity attacks that are rampant across the globe, they're getting more sophisticated. You know, I need a professional team and I can't hire one myself. So I needed to go, you know, find a partner that has one for me.
And, you know, and also say Jonathan was lucky enough to have a group called the Hospital Cooperative in Pocatello, Idaho, that gets the CIOs, IT directors together in that area to, you know, mind meld, you know, what's going on in your place, what's going on in our place, and they all get together. It's a great thing. If I know that those exist in different parts of the country. If those exist, you know, for you, definitely use them.
Yeah. Along those lines, absolutely. That IT peer group is invaluable. We talked amongst ourselves. It was a group of hospitals amongst ourselves all the time about this content and how best to solve it. And, you know, every once in a while, a hospital would one of the IT directors would find, hey, here's the solution I'm looking at. What do you guys think? And we'd bring it in and we kind of look at it. So that peer group's invaluable.
Yeah. All right, Fred, what should people not do?
So the things that you shouldn't do are think you can do all this on your own is kind of like one of the main themes here. You have to get assistance to do this. It's not possible for major regional hospitals to do this. We help major regional hospitals do this. So if you're a critical care hospital, you've got to reach out, you've got to figure out, where can I go get help to do this? And to do that, I would focus on the things that are in the close to impossible to handle. Staffing something 24/7, 365. Yeah, hospitals certainly run 24/7, 365, but the IT staff generally do not. So you need to have some way to manage, as we've talked about, these alerts, because when they come in, you have minutes, hours to react, not days, and certainly not weeks. So you need to have somebody available to watch this stuff 24/7. They need to be capable. They need to be able to take some actions probably on their own. So what does that mean? Well, most technologies now allow you to do rapid quarantine actions. In other words, I can't get back into the office at 3 a.m. on Saturday. I can be back in at 8 a.m. Monday. Well, if I can quarantine that system, I can keep that system isolated. No worse things happen. No more data is being stolen. It's not attacking other systems. And now I can come in on Monday morning and pick up where the service provider has quarantined this system. So I think you really need to focus on this component that's the most difficult to do, and that's watching what's going on. But you also need to make sure that you have a fully functioning vulnerability management program. So just going out and patching, based on what Microsoft tells you, it's probably not enough. You need to get ahead of that. You need to know, in fact, if a critical vulnerability comes out, and we know that plenty have, like this printer vulnerability that's being taken advantage of right now, you need to go out and patch those, because the bad guys know that the fastest anybody patches is 30 days. So unfortunately, now they're going to have their exploits ready and launched within 30 days. So if something's critical and it's exposed externally, you need to get ahead of that as fast as possible. There we go. Continue.
Yeah. Well,
Can I add to that?
Yes, you can.
I'd like to abstract what Fred said a little bit. So what not to do, don't focus your budget asks on just technical preventive controls, right? This bit about you got to be able to take a punch. This is where we're all doing planning these days. I mean, we put, like, it doesn't matter what new technology and buzzwords come out of RSA next year. Don't rush to go do that if you haven't put together a response plan and a resilience plan, right? So doing it wrong, okay, don't develop a response and recovery plan. Don't practice your plan. Do think that you're just going to let insurance handle everything, right? So as you go through budgeting and, hopefully what you're doing is you're aligning yourself with some kind of framework, and so that you can identify your gaps. The gaps in monitoring and response are going to be pronounced. Get after those.
The other thing I would throw in there, Mike, too, with that is it's an organizational problem, not an IT problem.
Yeah, for sure.
100% correct.
And so this is a slide. So as Cassidy mentioned before, I talk to a lot of hospital boards. When we end up talking to hospitals, I'll have an IT director or a CIO say, hey, can somebody come talk to my board? And, so I put together this slide for how boards should ask about, ask their IT directors, who should be in at least one board meeting per quarter, how we're prepared. So number one is, how do we stop an attack? Are we prepared for a breach? But number two, also detecting, how do we catch an attack fast? And how many attacks have we caught? And then responding, what is our response plan and how fast is it? And then what is our insurance role in that? And every board, every group of hospital administrators should know the answers to these questions. And, John Rigi from the American Hospital Association, says this left and right. Your IT director, your CIO, whoever's in charge of security needs to be presenting to the executive team about these questions all the time, not just, hey, how do we stop an attack? Because you cannot stop them all.
Hey, real quick, I want to point out the one question we always want to ask. Do you already have a position on ransomware? Are you going to pay the ransom? That decision should be made well before anything bad happens, because you do not want to wait till you have to start transferring patients to make that sort of decision. So some of these decisions that you think you make when bad things happen need to be made ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure.
And along those lines, with like poor planning, like, can you go 2 weeks out? Can you go 30 days out? Can you go 60 days out? I mean, these are things that will take your hospital down. And if you do not have the proper plan in place, you're looking at that extended time trying to figure things out. And what if your plan is all on the network and it goes offline? Do you have a way to retrieve that? Do you know anything about the plan after that? Right. So you really got to build that resiliency.
And Mike, one of the things that you got asked for at the American Hospital Association Rural Conference was how can we save money on this? How can we do it without spending a ton?
So there are lots of free things that you can get from the federal government, from Health and Human Services, et cetera. But the biggest thing that you can do, and this is grounded in data. When I was the CISO for the city of Seattle, I was big on monitoring, and so we took a lot of measurements, and we could prove that 40% of the compromised assets of the network were due to the use of personal email. Okay, here's Outlook, and it's all cleaned up, and we do no bad attachments, no bad links. It's all dropped on the floor. And right next to it, there's a web browser opened to Bubba's email service with no controls at all. What good did it do to spend that money? All right. So if with a policy change, you can make 40% of the problem go off a cliff, here's your policy. Personal use on a personal device. Gmail, Facebook, they live here now. All of a sudden, 40% of the problem just went away. Now, that's not easy to do. When I had to do it in the public sector, I was not successful, because public sector employees are very entitled and they don't want to have stuff taken away from them. You have to negotiate with labor. I know one person who's been able to do it in the health sector. I won't call him out right now, but if you're able to do something like that, a policy change takes you further than anything else. Train your users. There's no firewall for gullibility. Send them to our free security awareness training. We do it every other week. We'll put the fear of God in them. Practice that incident response. Tabletop exercise. When you convene an incident, not the response team, but the incident management team, that should have executives there. You're going to need to communicate with the public. You are probably going to need to, like in Jake's story, you may need to approve $1 million spend right now. And so you need somebody from finance, executive leadership at the table, right? And that team is going to designate the response team and what the reporting cadence is going to be. And there's a very structured way of doing all these things. Get into that structure, figure out how that works. Multi-factor authentication, even though it is routinely defeated now, is still one of your best friends. Multi-factor authentication is not a second secret, right? The color of your first car, right? Multi-factor authentication is two of the following: something you know, something you have, something you are. It's got to be two different ones, right? What I know is my password, what I have is my phone. If I can type the code that came on my phone, I just proved I have my phone. Your medical IoT and some of the other things that are connected to the network that aren't typically thought of as computers are computers. And so as best you can, section those off with network segmentation and strong access control. Okay, we're getting into a little buzzwordy area right here, but that's really the advice. Managed services are your friends. We are the focal point for the resources that are really hard for you to get. And we have a secret sauce in how we work with universities to source and train our employees, especially our analysts. That's what managed services are here for. Interns, go out and create relationships with your local schools. And everybody wants a degree, their bright new shiny degree in cyber. Well, they're going to need some experience, because when you come off that assembly line, you don't have enough experience to really get even an entry-level job. So if you've interned at a hospital, in a position where you're doing nothing more than watching the logs, that's great. And then if you're a hospital district that gets public funding, you have an elected board, you might have, taxing authority, you may be in scope for the state local cyber grant program that is being adjudicated by all the states right now. They're coming up with their all of state plans. Hopefully you've got a seat at that table and you will be included in that plan. So there's some things that don't cost a lot of money. And again, Homeland Security, CISA, Health and Human Services have free stuff. For example, here's this cybersecurity toolkit for rural hospitals. Now, this is a little dated, and there's new information that's come out from Health and Human Services recently about how, like the other critical sectors, dams, water, finance, energy, they want you to align with the NIST cybersecurity framework rather than however you did your HIPAA risk assessment before. That's actually a good thing. But here is some other guidance that is in this guide that is specifically for rural hospitals.
And, Fred, one of the really important things is making sure that, rural hospitals have a great IT department, that independent hospitals stay independent. How should these folks decide what that internal team can and can't do?
Sure. So there are things that you do on an annual basis, or you should be doing things like vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, incident response tabletop exercises, reviewing your policy. A lot of these things are specialist skills, right? To be a pen tester or a web application tester or a cloud tester, it's not something you want to go hire somebody that they're going to use for 2 months. And then what do you do with them for the rest of the year? So look at these highly specialized skill sets you have to have and find a way to outsource those, because you're going to use them for a month, couple weeks, every year. You don't want to hire those on staff. So think about the things you want to keep in-house. The things you want to keep in-house are the things that you want to keep close to you. I mentioned policy. You should probably be the ones updating your policy, because there's no better way to know how well you're complying, whether people are actually doing what's in the policy, if you go through those and understand. And it really behooves you to do that, because ultimately, if I'm the director of IT or CIO, I'm responsible for what's in those policies. And if we're not doing it and something bad happens, now I'm negligent, right? So I'd say stay close to the things that are not highly specialized. Policy, you can get a lot of guidance online, and basically it's tailoring it to your own organizational needs. But things that are highly specialized, outsource. It's crazy to really try to do your own internal pen test. I'd suggest for tabletop exercises, yeah, people can run them. For organizations like ours that have gotten really good at doing this, we can add a ton of value that most people can't, because they just haven't been through the process 24 times a year like we are.
Yeah.
One thing I'd interject into that, Fred, is also like, you can use a lot of these free utilities for creating your policies and stuff like that. But part of the problem is sometimes you have blinders on because you're used to this environment, right? And so sometimes having that third-party vendor come in, review your policies to make sure that you are doing what you're saying you're doing has a lot of value.
Yep.
And as we talk to rural hospitals, look, we know that your budgets are not giant, and you should never, as a rural hospital, you should never pay retail. You should never pay retail for 2 reasons. Number one is you are critical to the country. You should be getting the best prices so that you can have the best security out there. It is not okay that, Bank of America has all the money in the world and can have this amazing security where, Nicola at South Lincoln Hospital District, can't. Like, that's not okay. And so there are a couple of things that we tell folks. Number one is the American Hospital Association has all of these members. They're called APCP members, and the AHA has negotiated discounts. Also, GPOs have negotiated discounts. Provista, Vizient, One GPA, have all negotiated discounts ahead of time, which also helps you skip RFPs if you do RFPs. But all of those ways are good ways to find discounts. You should, I'll say it again, you can get better prices than what is out there on the internet. Mike, you earlier talked about NIST CSF. Can you talk about how, the new idea here that Mike and Fred, how hospitals need to align with NIST CSF?
Yeah, well, just in general, the critical sectors are now being addressed by the federal government in a way that they never were before. And I know this. I was the vice chair of a Homeland Security Government Coordinating Council for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. And there was always a whole lot of paper being pushed around, but there was never any really concrete requirements given to any of the critical sectors until the Colonial Pipeline thing happened. And then all of a sudden we got significant religion about critical infrastructure. And so since that time, rail, aviation, water, pipelines, and healthcare have all received cybersecurity guidance from their sector-specific agency. So for you in the healthcare sector, your sector-specific agency obviously is Health and Human Services. Water, it's the EPA, et cetera, et cetera. And so the newest guidance from, and you have always had the HIPAA security rule, and you can blame/thank Fred for that. But the new guidance is they want you to use the NIST cybersecurity framework to conduct your risk assessment annually. And the reason that this is, and I said before, that's actually a good thing. The reason it's a good thing is because the NIST cybersecurity framework is an outcome-based framework. It does not say have this specific control in place. It says make this thing happen. And however you do that is up to you. So what's an example? Remote access is managed. You don't necessarily have to go buy expensive tools and software to make that happen. If a vendor calls you up and says, hey, I need to get in to administer, make an administrative change on something or perform some maintenance, you open up a firewall, let them in. When they're done, you close them back out. Remote access is managed. Okay, so that's why this is a particularly good framework. And in today's world, it has 5 focus areas. So it's identify, got to know what's on your network. Protect, have those preventive controls in place. Detect, be able to find when something has gone wrong. Respond, and recover. There's 5 sections there. The new NIST framework, which is undergoing the comment period right now, will have a new section for governance, which is hugely important. Why is that? Because when you identify a risk, there are only certain things you can do about that. You can accept the risk, right? 79 Ford Pintos, they blow up when they get rear-ended. Ford said, no, we're not going to fix that. We're going to pay off the dead people because it's cheaper. They accepted the risk. You can avoid the risk, turn off that Windows 2003 server that's out there on the internet right now because it's just sitting there waiting to be attacked. You can mitigate risk through the application of controls, and you're going to need budget for that. Or you can transfer risk through insurance. That's it. And when you figure out what you're going to do with every risk that you identify, you send that to a governance organization and you get executive fingerprints on the decisions. Why? Because there's lots of risks that you will end up accepting, and you don't want your fingerprints to be the only ones on that decision, right? This needs to go up to an executive level where people can decide as a group, here's what we're going to do about these things. And it's perfectly okay to accept risk. That's what Ford did. But you don't want to be the one that does that in a vacuum. Now, we have modified the NIST cybersecurity framework, put it all into a spreadsheet and turned it into something that you can use for risk identification and budgeting purposes. So that when you go to ask for money for stuff, you say, because we assessed ourselves against this standard framework, the one that the federal government told us to use, Health and Human Services says use this, all of these gaps are risks. What are we going to do about these? Okay, we really think that we ought to backfill, and we're going to need some resources to make these things happen. Right? That is the methodical way to go about it. And when you find all those gaps, those risks, ones that you're going to mitigate, not just let the insurance handle, or not just going to turn off the machine, you're going to need budgeting for that. So you can figure out, are we going to fix this with internal resources? Are we going to need to hire professional services or a managed service? Or are we going to make a capital purchase for this, right? Because the color of money is different in those places. So this is a very methodical way of going about this. It gives you a risk assessment that you're supposed to do every year, a corrective action roadmap, which could be as long as 2 years long, and the budget numbers that you're going to need to go ask for this that are justified by this assessment against this framework. That's why the NIST cybersecurity framework is important. And if anybody wants this spreadsheet, we'll give it to you. It's better if we help you through it. You are capable of doing this yourself.
And I put my email address in the chat. If anybody wants the spreadsheet and a chat with Mike about it, shoot me an email, jake@criticalinsight.com. Happy to give it out. I can't post it in a Zoom chat. So happy to do that. I do want to, we're close to the top of the hour here. I do want to open it up to questions before we finish up here. Cassidy, I don't know if you've gotten any one-on-one questions. I don't know if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question.
Jake, I have not received anything in chat yet.
Anthony looks like he has an amazing story to tell about being the director of a member hospital of the UHS ransomware infection in 2020. But I don't know if anyone has questions or stories they want to tell.
Now that was quite the thing. This is Anthony. I don't know whether I thought I was famous. But being the largest ransomware, in history, it was I have quite the story to tell on that and how we recovered in a record time.
So how did you recover in record time?
Well, I was at a hospital that was a 490 bed hospital, in Amarillo, Texas, and all 400 plus hospitals were 100% down. All Windows machines were completely down. It was that Ryuk,
yeah,
Ryuk.
RYUK, yeah.
Yes, that Ryuk, yeah, that's down. And it actually came from the UHS corporate environment. It was for some reason one of their agents that was a detecting agent on every Windows device had a God password, and it went through the whole system. But really, the way it traveled was through the $, the default shares. And so part of the inoculation process when we were recovering was to eliminate all the default shares, and it created some management problems that we just had to work around. But we actually were back up and doing charting on the third day. It was a Sunday morning, and on late Tuesday and early Wednesday, we had at least one nurse's station. Every nurse's station in the enterprise had at least one computer and one printer that was working. And
wow,
we were there for a while. We were re-imaging over 900 to 1,100 machines a day with just our inside help. Most of the other hospitals went and got third-party people, but I just wasn't comfortable with giving the keys to the kingdom to somebody that we didn't own. So it was quite a deal. 24/7 for about 3 weeks, and then 12 hours, 6 days a week, and then down until we were 100% recovered within 3 months.
Wow. Well, I hope somebody bought you a lot of pizza and beer and coffee.
We had a lot of breakfast. Really and truly, we had a lot of breakfast, and it was hard to balance the needs of the CEO and patient care against the needs of the CFO wanting to get money, wanting to bill. So it was quite the story. There's a lot more to go with that, and I'm going to write a book one day.
Well, we'll all show up for that. Anthony, we should have had you do the webinar. Cassidy will take a note to do that for next time. I'll come to that one.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Anthony.
So a couple other things to know, so we help organizations, prepare, detect, and respond to cyber attacks in the way that we've talked about here, with risk assessments, technical testing, detection with the security operations centers, and then responding, we can take action. Or one of the things we found with healthcare organizations is depends on the device, whether they want you to respond. So we do custom actions there. Now, one of the important things is on the bottom here. Mike, for 15 years, has sent out a news blast of all of the cybersecurity news that is fit to print. He's like the New York Times of cybersecurity news. If you go to our website, criticalinsight.com, you can sign up there for Mike's emails. And another way to save money is Mike and I do free security awareness training every other Friday. And there are a bunch of hospitals that have taken advantage of that. We'll tell you which of your employees have gone. And obviously we're used to doing webinars. So if folks have any questions, if you need anything from us, as I said, I put my email address in the chat and happy to send out that spreadsheet. My only regret about this time is that we didn't start with Anthony's story, because that was a pretty good one. So
a margarita.
we will send you. Let's see, you wanted a margarita, and I think it was Frank who wanted the ham sandwich, or somebody else wanted the ham sandwich. So we'll keep that in mind. So final thoughts, Jonathan. Final thoughts from you.
Yeah, you need to really find somebody you can work with, partner up with. You cannot do this alone. And you got to be budget conscious, right? So making sure that you partner up with somebody that has your best interest in mind, that's not going to gouge you while you look for solutions for your environment.
Yeah. And regardless of whether it's us or anyone else, if you want to ask advice of like, hey, I'm thinking about this EDR, I'm thinking about that, happy to give you advice there. And as Mike and Fred do their final thoughts, a note from Cassidy in the chat there, make sure to take the survey. Mike, final thoughts?
Yes. Personal use on a personal device, and prepare to take a punch. Don't be fooled into thinking that you can prevent this thing. As soon as you hit the crosshairs, they're very well resourced, very numerous, and highly motivated. And you're a target because you're critical, and you're probably going to pay a ransom to get back to work. That's why they're coming after you. So get ready to take that punch.
All right. Cassidy, can I give Fred final thoughts, or do you need to close it out?
No, go right ahead.
Fred, go for it.
Sure. Go talk to your boards. One thing we know about critical access and rural hospitals is their boards are wonderful, diligent, hardworking people, but they tend to be highly non-technical. Please get in front of them, start educating them, help them to understand what you're facing.
That's good advice.
And on behalf of all of us and all of you, I just want to thank Cassidy and the group in Texas for inviting us. Cassidy, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jake. Thank you everyone for attending. There was some excellent information, and we've already gotten great feedback in the chat. So we appreciate you guys so much. If you have questions, please email myself or anyone, Jake, anyone that you saw on the webinar today, and we will be happy to get back to you with anything that you're looking for. So look for the email that has the link to the recording and the survey link if you didn't take it just now. And we will see you guys next month for our July webinar. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.